Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to California State University, Northridge. As president, I'm honored to be here today to represent the university in the strides that we have made regarding emergency preparedness and earthquake safety for our over 40,000 students and close to 5,000 staff and faculty employees. We are gathered here today to demonstrate our support of the efforts of Senator Bob Hertzberg, who represents the university in the 18th Senate District. I want to go on the record for saying I support any and all steps that can be taken to protect our students, our faculty, and our community. I'm looking forward to working with Senator Hertzberg to help accomplish the disaster preparedness goals that he will outline for all of us today. Thank you, Senator Hertzberg. Most of you know, of course, that we at CSUN know all too well the devastation, the pain, the heartbreak that an earthquake can cause. 25 years ago, on this very day, a powerful earthquake rocked Southern California and forever altered the lives of so many, including lives lost. The CSUN campus and infrastructure were also gravely affected. The campus experienced catastrophic damage to nearly every building, as well as a total collapse of a parking structure, which is pictured behind me. You can see it. The history of CSUN is sadly intertwined with the memory of the destructive Northridge earthquake. When CSUN faced disaster back in 1994, friends and strangers alike supported us in our time of need. The community came together like never before. The city, the state, the federal government worked together to solve problems and get people the help that they needed. This is also the legacy and history of CSUN, and I am so proud of the resilience of our community. I want to thank Assembly members Jesse Gabriel and Adrian Nazarian, who are here today, and Council Member Bob Blumenfeld, and Deputy Mayor Jeff Gorell for being here and for their leadership and their support. I also want to acknowledge Dr. Lucy Jones, who is the founder of the Center for Science and Society, and Glenn Pomeroy, Chief Executive Officer of the California Earthquake Authority. Thank you all for being here today. I also want to acknowledge the support of Mayor Eric Garcetti and Council Member Monica Rodriguez and many, many others. Senator Hertzberg, please know that your efforts are greatly appreciated by the CSUN community. Please continue to count on us as good partners with you, and we look forward to working with you on these efforts. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Madam President. I know she doesn't look like it, but we all know who've worked with President Harrison that she is indeed a rock star. I love saying that. At this place, 25 years ago, the earth shook. And it shook at a level that impacted 60,000 homes, apartments, and mobile homes that were gone or unlivable for a week or longer. The Northridge earthquake left 60 dead, 9,000 injured. Tens of thousands of people throughout the San Fernando Valley had no water for days after the earthquake. And it cost over $20 billion from 25 years ago, household damages, and left 22,000 people homeless. If you think about that as we're dealing with the homeless issue today. The chances that California, listen to this, the chances that California will experience a 6.7 or larger earthquake in the next 30 years, as Lucy Jones will tell you, is 99%. The only thing we don't know is where it will be, when it will be, and how big it will be. We could all be standing here in the next 30 seconds, if we think about it for a moment, and suffer from one of those earthquakes. We just never know. So we here today as not-for-profits and the the administration of California, the city and the state stand here as elected officials, and we have an obligation to figure it out, to fix it, to protect the public. The question is, are we ready? Are we ready to deal with the financial costs and the human costs of the next Northridge? The role of government as its core, as I mentioned, is to protect the people that we represent. But it is also much more than that. We need to get ahead of the game. We need to be smart and creative and to protect people, not from what happens after the fact, but to get ahead of the game. And so, with respect to those problems, it's now estimated in the recent studies that 250,000 people in Southern California could be forced out of their homes after a major earthquake. 250,000 people. That's about, in any major region, already facing this extraordinary housing crisis. But it's not limited to Los Angeles. 1.2 million older houses in California are hazardous areas and vulnerable to damages like you see in the pictures here today. You'll hear from the Deputy Mayor, Jeff Gorell. The mayor is downtown Los Angeles working on yet another crisis with respect to education, is focused on that, as he should be. Councilmember Blumenfeld, who was the former chair of the Assembly Budget Committee and represents this area. The Councilmember Rodriguez was supposed to be here. Adrien Nazarian, who's my Assembly member, who has been working in this area for a long time. Last year, dedicating over $30 million in the space. This year, again, coming back with his bill, which he'll talk about, to allow tax deductibility for retrofits. And the legislature, is one of its earlier efforts after Northridge, created the California Earthquake Authority. CEA Brace and Bolt program launched in 2014 have been able to retrofit over 4,000 homes in Los Angeles County, 6,700 homes, correct, statewide. It's a small number when you compare that to the 1.2 million homes that were built before 1960, that if you did do the brace and bolt, you would dramatically reduce the kind of cost and damage and exposure to human life. And so for more than 1 million houses, they have a code-compliant retrofit, could cost about $3,000. And it could prevent a family from losing everything. It could be the difference between life and death, between moving forward and bankruptcy. And that's why what you're going to hear today is that we are working with the California Earthquake Authority in the legislature to expand their ability to retrofit homes. And as I was just at a meeting this morning with the governor, and he was talking about not shying away from tough problems and going big, and that's what we intend to do. We intend to create a $1 billion program by refinancing and restructuring how the California Earthquake Authority works to brace and bolt as many homes and to provide as much resilience as much as we can to protect as many homes as we possibly can throughout California and apartment buildings. The Mayor of Los Angeles, that you'll hear about it today in Los Angeles, has done a great retrofitting program. I think, wasn't Mr. Krikorian involved in that measure too? But the bottom line is that every dollar that we spend will save thousands and thousands of dollars tomorrow. We have to get ahead of the game. We have to be innovative. We have to be creative. And we know that we're going to be facing this challenge, and we need to just, as they say, and the son of the former mayor, or the governor of New York, we have to get after it. And so with that, I want to introduce here today the deputy mayor standing in place, brilliant and handsome former Assembly member, very decent guy, and he's doing a great job. The Deputy Mayor for Public Safety, Mr. Jeff Gorell.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Senate Majority Leader. We thank you so much for your leadership in Sacramento on this important issue and everything regarding public safety. I'm honored to join these distinguished speakers today here on behalf of Mayor Eric Garcetti. There's a few things in this world that can make us feel as insignificant or small or vulnerable as Mother Nature. And 25 years ago today, Mother Nature spoke, and the earth shook, and it opened up. 57 people died, 8,000 were injured, countless thousands of buildings were destroyed and infrastructure. And yes, we may feel insignificant at times, but we're not helpless. And what's important is that these key leaders behind me at the state and local level have done everything they can to identify lessons learned and to embrace those lessons so that we can limit the loss of life and the damage to property next time we have a major earthquake. And as Dr. Lucy Jones will tell you in a minute, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We've made an effort to retrofit buildings throughout the city of Los Angeles. Resilience by Design is a blueprint that was released from the lessons learned from this earthquake. Today, more than 1,500 soft-story buildings have been retrofitted. Another 3,301 buildings have had permits issued to do the same. And by 2024, we will see all 12,865 of these buildings retrofitted. Even today, we have 21,000 households that are safer than they were before these earthquake retrofit ordinances were established. Our focus isn't just limited to this hardware. We're also looking to the software that can save lives. Just week before last, Mayor Eric Garcetti, in partnership with USGS and AT&T, launched Shake Alert LA. It's the first in the nation free, municipally offered, publicly offered earthquake early warning app. And we encourage right now all Angelenos, all Northridge students, and everyone in Los Angeles County to take the few seconds to download Shake Alert LA on your iPhone or on your Google-powered device, because these few seconds can save your life. If you're able to receive an early warning, 2 seconds, 5 seconds, as many as 60 seconds from a San Andreas fault earthquake, you can do things like slow your car down and park it safely, or stop the elevator and get out of the elevator. You can get out from underneath power lines or move away from plate glass windows. These few seconds are lifesavers. An overwhelming response so far to this app. We've had more than 373,000 downloads from the Los Angeles area. And we want people to continue to get the word out to your friends and family, because this is a lifesaver. Resilient Los Angeles is the first citywide resilience strategy that was released. And what we know is most important in our city's resilience strategy is the government can't do it alone. The most important factor here is what you do, the people of Los Angeles, within your home, in your apartment, in your family, in the neighborhood, and in your block, to prepare yourself. Because in a major event, it is probably not within 10 days that you will see an emergency response official be able to make it to your front door. The first person you will probably see is a family member or a neighbor. And so we're encouraging people to go to notifyla.org and sign up for emergency alerts that you would receive after a big earthquake or event. Don't forget to go to that website and learn what you can do for your family or for your small business to better prepare for the next Northridge earthquake. This is an anniversary, it's an opportunity for us all to recommit ourselves to this important work of building a city that's more resilient. And never forget, the resilience begins with the individual, all of you.
And I really want to thank you for the efforts that you're doing with CSUN here and the renewed commitment to getting us ready, because as is mentioned, it's not if, it's when. 25 years ago when this earthquake hit, it changed the trajectory of my life, and it changed the lives of many people. Although, unlike most people who'd say that, I wasn't actually here in Los Angeles. I was in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I got a call. I was the legislative director for the congressman who represents this area and whose district had just been destroyed. I got a call from a friend of mine who worked at CNN saying, your district has just been basically pummeled by an earthquake. And made my way into the Capitol to start working on the earthquake assistance bill. And it was a crazy story of how we ended up getting that money. We ended up getting over $14 billion worth of aid. It was the largest single package federal funding going into a district up until that time in history. And I think about that now, and we had to align all the forces, and we had a government that was really focused on preparedness. James Lee Witt was the head of FEMA, and FEMA had just been made independent and was really at its zenith. It was at its apex. And I worry, because now you hear things on TV, the president talking about not funding for the fires that we've had, and I really worry whether we're going to get even the level of commitment that we were able to get. And you saw what happened with the Katrina and other issues. So we can't count on the federal government rushing to our aid. We're going to rely on that as much as we can, but we need to be resilient here, and it makes what you're doing at the state level particularly important because we need to be self-sufficient. For me, preparedness, because of what happened and the Northridge earthquake, and I should say my life changed at that point. I thought I was just going to be a regular legislative director doing legislative things in D.C. For the next year and a half, all I did was focus on the recovery. And it's not so simple. It doesn't just happen for a day or two. It was dealing with the hospitals and changing the algorithms so that they could get the funding they needed, trying to put a package so that Panorama Kaiser wouldn't leave because they wanted to leave, but we wanted to give them, we ended up giving about $125 million in aid, but we did it in a way that kept them here. Working on the SBA loans and trying to prevent this town from becoming a ghost town, which was what a lot of people predicted back then would happen. But it didn't happen because a lot of people were committed and there was a lot of intervention. But we were also very lucky back then. It happened early in the morning. It wasn't as bad in some ways. You know, now, as Lucy will talk about, what's predicted is something that could be 40 times as strong as what happened. And it wouldn't just affect this area here. And where that was hit, by the way, is now the center, is part of my district now. I represent, among other areas, Reseda, which is where the epicenter of the earthquake actually was. So we're gonna be hit by something else, and we need to be resilient. And the mayor, the deputy mayor, talked about some of the things we're doing on the city level. I'm very proud of the city. We're focused. We have some of the most aggressive laws now on the books in terms of retrofit, but we need money to help pay for that, and that's where the state can come in and some creative programs can come in to be able to make that happen. In my district, we've done something. I have something called a community action team, emergency preparedness team, that I started. The first thing I did when I was actually elected to the assembly, and I've kept it going in the city, was putting this team of volunteers together to help coordinate a volunteer response. And during the Woolsey fire just recently, and one of the crazy things that we do, I'm probably the only elected official that has a warehouse full of emergency supplies, but we have that. And when Woolsey fire hit, we had supplies to the evacuation centers within hours. And we were asking them what else they needed, and we ended up turning my office into a donation center, and we had hundreds of people coming, thousands actually, of donations, and we're able to help make that happen. So we need to be creative, and we need to be resilient. And today's 25 years reminds us we've got to focus on that, and I'm proud to be part of the team here of officials who is going to work together to make us prepared, because we may not got another 25 years before this big one hits. It's coming soon. And I, for one, am going to redouble my efforts on this occasion. It's doing everything I can to make sure we're prepared, and I know everybody else here is as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob. And just so you know, Shake Alert LA right here. You got to have it. And you know, this is also, what the mayor has done is fantastic, but it's part of a plan that Adam Schiff was working on, a number of people in Sacramento who have been working on this to get the funds. So there's over 1,100 of these nodes in California. Caltech got a grant, Lucy was saying, for $5 million that helped us get ahead of the game here in Los Angeles. And so with that, I want to introduce Dr. Lucy Jones. But, you know, it's interesting, and you know, I've lived in LA all my life. I actually lost my home in the Northridge earthquake, unfortunately. But Dr. Jones, who used to be with Caltech, now is with the Center for Science, the Dr. Lucy Jones Center for Science and Society. But she's one of these comforting voices who, for somebody who's a rocket scientist who understands stuff at a level that none of the rest of us do, has an ability to both comfort us and to explain the circumstances and what's going on in the simplest terms. Recently, on all this issues of the rollout of the Shake LA, I watched you. There was some old footage of you from 25 years ago, and there you were, being the first one, woke up in the middle of the night, giving us comfort, helping us, and here she is, ladies and gentlemen, to help us understand what we're facing here on this anniversary and going forward, Dr. Lucy Jones.
So thank you all. I think these type of press conferences, what you're supposed to do is say, what was I doing 25 years ago? I wish I could remember. I really can't remember much of what happened that day. I have these isolated vignettes. I can remember getting out of bed, and I can remember a couple of press conferences, and I remember a couple of arguments. And what are we going to call this? Well, you're not supposed to name it after a city. What's the feature that we can do? There's Northridge Hills, but there's a Northridge Hills fault, and it's not on the Northridge Hills fault. And we argued so long that the press was calling it Northridge before we made up our mind that we had to go along. I really can't do a lot on that one. What I can do, though, is what I know the reason I'm here is to convince you that there's more coming. So I'll say I'm probably the only one in this room, or at least the only one up at this podium, that doesn't think Northridge was a big earthquake. And I think that's the big message. It was only a 6.7. And what it means to be a bigger earthquake is not stronger shaking at some site. It's strong shaking at many more sites. So 500,000 people received strong shaking in the Northridge earthquake. When we have a 7.8 on the San Andreas Fault, we'll have about 10 million people receiving an equivalent level of shaking. And that's why it's different. I think actually Los Angeles can be pretty proud, and California can be pretty proud about how we handled the Northridge earthquake. It was very devastating to a lot of people. We mobilized quickly. As you heard, we had a very proactive FEMA that came in here and got a lot of money moving. 40% of the people who had damage in that earthquake had earthquake insurance. It's a lot lower now. I heard we're up from 9%, 13% now?
Yep, 13%.
Still 1/3 the number that had it back in 1994. Okay? All of those factors meant that we were able to respond quickly. And people got out and hired contractors, and contractors hired subcontractors, and we got our economy going again. Are we going to be able to do it when 10 million people have the problem? And we're not if we only have 13% insurance coverage and we haven't done anything to prepare our houses. Because my second message, besides don't think you've gotten through a big earthquake before, is the earthquake is inevitable, but the disaster is not, because many of the problems can be fixed ahead of time if we choose to do it. Every time I've bought a house in the LA area, and we've moved a couple of times, the first thing we do is bring in a foundation specialist to see what can be done to make it stronger, to use what is being promoted by CEA with the Brace and Bolt program. Because you don't have to lose your house. You've got a choice to make. And we need to encourage more people to do it. And with 25 years since the last big earthquake, a lot of us have forgotten or never knew how many Californians weren't here 25 years ago and don't understand that it's not inevitable. You just got to sit back and wait and see what happens. We know it's coming. We can do something about it. And the fact that we are seeing over the last few years this incredible level of political will to move on it is really encouraging to me. At the local and the state level, we are seeing an engagement and understanding that both that the earthquake's inevitable, but there's something we can do about it. So I want to congratulate everyone who's been able to get this moving forward and continue, I hope, to have the political will to do what's best for California.
We will. We will. We'll get it together. Thank you, Dr. Jones. The earthquake is inevitable, disaster is not. That's the takeaway. That's the takeaway. If there's any message that we want to talk about here, is that there's going to be an earthquake, and we're going to do everything we can to minimize the disaster in that regard. And somebody who has been very involved for a number of years in this issue had a couple of bills vetoed, and it does not deter him. That's the big message in legislating. Keep fighting on. My assembly member, Mr. Adrien Nazarian, he's coming back. You're going to hear about some of his ideas. He has been very helpful with the Earthquake Authority on previous issues. He's gotten into the weeds on this stuff when a lot of other folks weren't focused on it. Ladies and gentlemen, Assembly Member Adrien Nazarian.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, when I was first elected 6 years ago, the question always was, well, what are your priorities? What are you going to work on? And representing the San Fernando Valley, I'd always say water, transportation, and addressing earthquakes. You would not think of earthquakes as being such a primary role-playing factor But given what we saw in the Valley in '94 and prior to that as well, given some of the inherent issues that we have, whether in the geology of our ground or the weaknesses and frailties in our infrastructure, it's key that we address this issue head on, and it requires multiple-pronged approach. It's not just legislative, it's not just funding and budget, but it's also administrative. It's thinking outside of the box and looking at funding mechanisms so that we ease the pain and the difficulty of property owners in being able to go through the retrofits that are necessary. Having the funding available so that the brace and bolt program is not just funded through the mechanism of the capital received from the insured, but the state making an investment. I think 3 years ago when we helped put in $6 million in the budget from general funds, that was the first time that general funds were actually used in the brace and bolt program. And by the way, it's always important to highlight the brace and bolt program. www.earthquakebraceandbolt.com is the website that you can go, type in your zip code, and see if you qualify for a $3,000 grant. And you can't not talk about this without explaining. It's one thing to talk about at a policy level. It's one thing to talk about at what it does to the economy, local economy, and regional economy. Given what a economic driver Los Angeles is, we saw what happened when the businesses came to a standstill in downtown LA, and we can't have that happen again. I'm also reintroducing legislation to ensure that all future buildings in California do not just protect life, but can be usable soon after an earthquake. That was the functional recovery bill of expanding and increasing and strengthening building standards. And the earthquake mapping will allow us the inventory to know what are the vulnerable buildings that we're working with in the state. So I look forward to working with all of you, and let us remember the lessons that we learned 25 years ago today and ensure that Los Angeles remains safe and sound for the next big one. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nazarian. Thank you so much, and appreciate all your hard work. And one of the great benefits of democracy is that we get to elect new and fresh faces, and here in the San Fernando Valley, one of those new faces recently elected is this brilliant fellow in the form of Jesse Gabriel, who's here today because he gets it. He's showing up. He's here. He's going to be engaged. He is going to be a dynamic force. He has not historically been involved in many of these issues, but being someone who's here to the San Fernando Valley, someone who represents us in the San Fernando Valley, you're going to see him at the forefront. That's why he's here today. Ladies and gentlemen, Assemblymember Jesse Gabriel.
Thank you, Senator Hertzberg, for that very kind introduction and for your great leadership. And I think we should all be very proud here in the Valley that we are so well served to have the majority leader of the state Senate be someone who's from the Valley and who's keeping our interests and our concerns at the forefront of state policymaking. And of course, wanted to thank President Harrison as well and CSUN for hosting us today. I am, as Senator Hertzberg mentioned, I'm the new guy. I represent the West San Fernando Valley up in Sacramento. I'm privileged to represent this great university and this great community up in Sacramento. Unlike Dr. Jones, I have very clear memories of 25 years ago. I was a 12-year-old kid, and the events of that day are pretty much seared into my memory. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, and I slept in a bed underneath a window, and I remember the window just shaking violently, and I put the pillow over the top of my head because I was convinced that the window was going to shatter and that I was going to be cut up. I remember my dad racing into the room. He grabbed my brother, who was 8, and me, and we went outside and sat outside on our cul-de-sac and talked with my mom. And I remember that we slept in our minivan for a couple nights. My brother, who was 8, was really, really afraid to go back into the house. I remember the aftershocks that a lot of folks may remember and how scary those were as well. So for those of us that were of that generation, these are a series of events that are really seared into our memory. And so this is an issue that I now approach through the lens of a father. I have 2 young kids who are 1 and 3, and as a legislator. And I feel that my top responsibility as a dad is to protect my kids, and my top responsibility as a legislator is to help protect my community. And so I'm very pleased to be able to work with folks like Senator Hertzberg, who are making a priority of this issue, I especially want to commend Assemblymember Nazarian. He has been absolutely true to his word. He has made this a top priority. I was very pleased to be able to support some of the legislation that he introduced. And folks should know that we in the legislature are taking this issue very seriously, and we're going to continue to press on it. Unfortunately, Governor Brown vetoed a number of very good bills that were able to pass the legislature, but we now have new leadership in Sacramento that we're excited to work with. I saw that our new governor, Governor Newsom, has put money into the budget to address earthquake issues. He is clearly thinking about these issues, and I think everybody understands this. As Dr. Jones said, this is inevitable. The earthquake is inevitable, but the disaster is not, and it's the preparation and the resilience that are the name of the game. And so in Sacramento and here in the city, and I also want to commend our mayor, Eric Garcetti, for the app. I've downloaded it as well and texted all my friends and family to make sure that they downloaded it. We are working together, different levels of government, to make sure that we're prepared and that we can be resilient when this happens, because it's not if, it is when.
California Earthquake Authority, a not-for-profit organization formed in the aftermath of Northridge after most for-profit insurance companies wanted nothing to do with this risk anymore. Launched, formed, now 22 years later, we do insure over 1 million homes. It is about totally insured in the state, about 13% of the state's population, or the state's homes. We can only regard that as what it is, which is a good start, and we need to redouble our efforts to make sure that more Californians have the financial strength to be able to survive financially after the big earthquake strikes, because, as has been said, 99% chance of another Northridge 6.7 sized earthquake happening somewhere in California over the next 30 years. Dr. Jones and the scientists tell us something else. They say there's a 75% chance of a 7.0 earthquake striking in that same period of time, and a 7.0 is nearly 3 times as strong as Northridge in terms of energy release. So this is all terribly serious, and we need to take it seriously. And our question should be, what should our response be to these known scientific facts? Fight or flight? Fight or flight, the fight or flight response, a physiological reaction to a known perceived threat. What should our response be to the fact that the next earthquake, a big damaging earthquake, is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when? You know, if we lived in Florida, it'd be a little easier to manage. Different form of natural disaster. Hurricanes are different than earthquakes. Form off the west coast of Africa. You can see them churning across the Atlantic, moving our direction. CNN's talking about it for 4 or 5 days, and Floridians have the opportunity to make a choice: fight or flight. Do they join the thousands who are evacuating up north and streaming up into the southeastern part of the country? Or are they going to take their chances and fight it out? Get the sandbags around their foundations, put up the plywood around their windows. Do they fight or flight? Well, Californians, we don't have that luxury. But we get to live in California. We do have the advance of the incredibly important technology, the early earthquake warning system, which will give Californians important, I believe, life-saving opportunities to take immediate steps, immediate action to make themselves safer when there's a notification that an earthquake is seconds or a moment away. But it's seconds or moments. It's not weeks or days or weeks. And so the question for us is, knowing that the threat is real, but knowing we're not going to get a week's notice, do we now fight or flight? Well, I am so proud to be joined by this collection of leaders today, and I can tell you there's no interest in fleeing up here. It's all about the fight, and it's about a commitment to redoubling our efforts to a fight that's ongoing. And with respect to making homes safer, the California Earthquake Authority wishes to join the fight in new and in stronger ways so we can take our efforts to the next level. In 2014, the CEA rolled out the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program. It's a great program. We now are able to provide some grants to some Californians, about 2,000 a year, who qualify and are selected in a lottery, and we can help them make their older home properly retrofitted. We've got a revenue stream of some dollars that come in. Assemblyman Nazarian provided key leadership at the state level to help bring state dollars into that as well. But those funds are limited. We've retrofitted about 7,500 homes now statewide, 4,000 in LA County. That's all great, and those 4,000 homes, the people who live in them will go to sleep tonight knowing that they're safer. Their house is less likely to slide off its foundation. It's less likely to need to be abandoned for several years until it can get rebuilt. It's less likely to catch fire after an earthquake. And they're the fortunate ones. But the need is so immense. And once again, our 7,500 homes that we've done so far must only be regarded as a good start, and we have to go forward from here. We estimate there are over 1 million homes in California that could benefit from the kind of retrofit that we're currently performing. And we know that that's just a subset of homes and apartments and condominiums and other residential structures that were built prior to when building codes became strengthened and therefore are in a more vulnerable condition. So the need is enormous. And we need to increase the amount of funding that we have to tackle this problem.
Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for everybody for participating. Onward and upward. We're going to be bold. It's going to be big. Stay tuned.